24.
Hey,
Yeah.
we're recording and getting ready to go live, folks. So
Pretty good.
all right. Thank you all for being here. This is the latest edition of our Zoom meetings. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, we'll dispense with these, but for now, this is the way we're going to operate. We'll call this meeting to order. Councilwoman Irvin, if you'll give us the invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank To the one and only Creator, we thank you for this precious day. We thank you for the calmness you bring within this meeting, that we may be able to handle the business of this city. We ask that you bring a blessing throughout the nation, bring peace, but bring justice, and bring a bridging of all things that has separated us, so that we can stand united, so that we can move this city as well as this country forward. We welcome you into this meeting upon this day. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance
Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
I,
United
of the United States of America,
States Republic,
and
to
to
the
the republic
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, members. You have in your packet the minutes of the May 11, 2020 regular meeting. Is there a motion?
so moved.
As a motion by Councilwoman Irvin, was that a second by Councilman Willis, I think I heard?
Yes.
Very well. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Very well. Thank you for that. Buddy is trying to escape, but we've got him back, it looks like. So now we have next of our agenda, the ordinances in position. First, bill number 2020-15 for a second reading, an ordinance to annex and zone NC 6.2, a parcel located at 1012 West Sumter Street, tax map parcels 90060-08-010
So moved.
and 011. There's a
I
motion.
get it, so moved.
There's a motion
Second.
by Councilwoman Irvin, second by Councilwoman Moore to adopt. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Bill passes unanimously on second reading. Next is Bill 2020-16 for a second reading. An ordinance to raise revenue and adopt a budget for the city of Florence, the fiscal year July 1, 2020 and ending June 30th, 2021. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Councilman Irvin. Is there a second?
Second,
I can't hear. Was there a second?
yes,
Second by Councilman Willis. And of course, we all recognize this is a passage of the budget for fiscal year beginning July 1st. We all recognize that this is a so-called kind of plain vanilla budget where we're essentially Sir? Right. Oh, quite right. Okay. Well, and Mr. Peterson has reminded me that we need to do a public meeting as well. So by way of introduction to that public meeting and to the amendment of the agenda necessary to achieve that, I want to remind the council and folks at home that this is, given the economic circumstances that are so uncertain right now, we have proposed, and now there is before us a motion to adopt on second reading a budget, which is essentially the budget at the levels of the preceding fiscal year. We know that there will be amendments necessary as we determine what the revenues are and what the necessary expenditures are. We also know that we've got a bond issuance that we've been planning, actually two bond issuances that we've been planning for some time, and that the council has adopted a variety of measures in support of over the course of the last year that will be up in front of us in the coming months that will be part and parcel of new budgets. But having said that, what you have before us is kind of the standard budget given the climate, and we will readdress all of this probably in the next 60 to 90 days, if not before then. Having said that, Mr. Peterson has told me before and reminded me again this morning that in order to meet our legal requirements, we must have a public hearing for this budget. There is the motion pending and seconded for us to vote upon. Prior to us voting on that, I would ask that the council consider the amendment to the agenda that allows for a public hearing to receive input on the budget for the fiscal year 2020 to 2021. Is there a motion that we amend the agenda so that we may allow this public hearing?
So move. I so move.
Motion by Councilwoman Moore, second by Councilwoman Irvin. Any objection? All right, hearing no objection, the agenda is amended to allow that public hearing. We've got another amendment that we'll take up after we do the budget matters. All right, so that having been adopted, let's now conduct the public hearing. We have advertised the availability to the public to participate via Zoom. I'm not sure, staff, whether we've had anyone call in. It doesn't appear that we have, or have we? We have not. And no one has notified us of their desire to participate in this public hearing. So given that, Mr. Peterson, I suppose I declare the public hearing complete and closed and the legal requirement satisfied. Very well. Let's then go back to the regular course of business. The budget, second reading, 2020-16. The bill has been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Very well. The budget passes unanimously, and we will, of course, in the coming months, take up the bond issuances and any budget amendments necessary. All right, very well. Then before we move forward into the introduction of ordinances, I'd ask another amendment to the agenda. You all should have in your packets an amendment to the agenda adding a resolution 2020-14 to extend the term of ordinance number 2020-13, providing emergency procedures for public meetings in the city of Florence during the continuance of the coronavirus epidemic. Of course, we are operating under an ordinance that we passed, I guess, a couple months ago now that allowed us to conduct public meetings via Zoom as we are now. It is, of course, our hope that that will discontinue some point in the near future, although given the rise in number of cases that we've experienced in this state over the past week or so, it's hard to know what that future will look like. And so I'm asking the council to adopt this ordinance to allow us to continue operating via Zoom if that continues to be necessary. That is the proposal that I asked added to the agenda. Let's first determine whether it shall be added to the agenda. Is there a motion that we add that matter to the agenda?
So move.
There's multiple motions. I heard Councilwoman Moore, and I think Councilman Willis, am I right?
Bailey.
Okay. And Councilwoman Irvin. Very well. So we've got motions and seconds. Any discussion? All in favor?
David,
Hello? Yes.
I'd like to have one. I think that these meetings, as they are very ineffective, and they do not allow for public input as much as they should be, and communication back and forth with us. We're trying to talk over each other, and that we should move forward as quickly as possible to get back to our normal work schedule.
Yes, sir, Mr. Pro Tem, and I share that sentiment. And frankly, I suspect that the entire council and the staff share that sentiment as well, that Buddy's expressing, as probably does the public as well. It is our desire, Mr. Pro Tem, that we dispense with Zoom meetings as soon as is practicable. And the current ordinance expires in the middle of June. June 13th, Mr. Peterson tells us, and Mr. Osterman tells us. So what we don't know is what the situation is going to be like in July. And so I certainly would urge, and I know council would urge staff, that to the extent we can dispense with it, let's dispense with it, that this authority that we'd be granting would be authority to do it if necessary, but our preference would be not to do. Is that correct? Is your view, Mr. Pro Tem?
Thank you.
Very well. All right. Councilwoman.
I do want to reiterate, I think that it's important that we do get back to our regular meetings, but as a healthcare provider, when we do it, we need to have protocols. We need to be distanced, because we don't need any more COVID-19 patients coming into the hospital under avoidable circumstances. So if we have to look at even how, if we are Zooming with the council, having the public, so they're coming into the building and being distancing. That's appropriate. But whatever we do, we need to do it with preventative efforts in place. Because right now our cases are rising, and we're rising in Florence because people are not respecting the fact that COVID-19 is real. And just because we want to proceed like it's not here, it's not realistic. So I too would say, whatever the staff can do, but yet protect the health of all of us and the citizens who want to be involved. That is the first priority, is our health and our safety. And we have got to lead by example that we're doing the right thing. And that's my comment.
And Mayor,
Councilwoman Moore.
until Florence begins to flatline and people starts to take it a little more seriously, and even we had all these testing sites and some people aren't even getting tested. Right now, I feel very comfortable doing it the way we're doing it because we're not respecting the situation the way we should be. And people just don't seem to care, but we have to be considerate of not just ourselves, but others also. So until Florence sees the urgency and the need, until we can start flatlining instead of increasing every day, we need to continue on the road that we're on now.
Thank you, Councilwoman Moore. Other comments? I think this dialogue is probably reflective of the views of all of us. In fact, there's this tension between our desire that the Pro Tem has stated to be open and transparent, to invite the public to the council chambers, to have the council members there present physically, and the concerns that Councilwoman Moore and Irvin point to for health and safety, which we also are very protective of and concerned about. And in a climate where the future of the virus and the infection levels are uncertain. This is going to be a play it by ear situation for a little while, folks. And it may involve, and Mr. Osterman and I have talked about the potential of some hybrid into the future where you'll allow some members and perhaps some members of the public to come in, but a limited number while others participate via Zoom. I think we potentially have the technical ability to achieve that. But again, right now, the future is uncertain in that regard. And so I think the council has expressed the concerns that staff and I are wrestling with, and we'll just chart forward the best course we can to protect both sets of interests. Thank you all for that discussion, though. Let me make sure I'm correct on the procedure now at this point. As we sit here, the resolution to extend the ordinance has not yet been added to the agenda. There has been a motion and second to add it to the agenda. All in favor of adding that matter to the agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very well. Now the matter is added to the agenda, and since we're here already, let's go ahead and address the resolution in principle. Is there a motion to adopt a resolution to extend the ordinance?
So moved.
So move.
There's a motion by Councilman Irvin, second by Councilwoman Moore. We've had discussion, but is there any further discussion on the subject? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Very well. The extension passes unanimously with the caveat and the understanding that we're going to work as assiduously as possible to both at the same time provide public discourse and interaction and dispense with Zoom as quickly and as practically as possible and to the extent we can possible, while at the same time protecting public health and safety. Very well. Thank you for that, members. We'll then return to the agenda in principle. The next matter is the introduction of ordinances. First, bill number 2020-11, which was before the council for a first reading to annex and zone a particular parcel on Third Loop. No action is required by that. The applicant has withdrawn their application, and therefore that matter is removed from the agenda, and we don't need to address that. Next matter before us is Bill number 2020-17 for a first reading. An ordinance revising the water and sewer rate schedule for the city of Florence, South Carolina. You all recall, we had some discussion about this at the last meeting and a desire to adopt the new 10-year rate schedule, but move the rates, inflation rate from 3% down to 1%. We'll be ready to address that, I believe, at the next meeting. So I'd ask that this matter be deferred until that next meeting. Is there any objection to deferring this? Very well. Hearing no objection, that'll be deferred until July. Next matter for our consideration is Bill 2020-18 for a first reading. An ordinance to amend Chapter 12, Article 3, Section 12-130 of the Code to allow for the protection of water meters from unlawful damage, tampering, or improper care. I know that staff is prepared to brief us on this. Is there a motion second so we may hear
So
from
moved.
Yocum? There's a
Second.
motion by Councilman Willis, second by Councilwoman Williams-Blake, I believe. Mr. Yocum, what say you?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As council is aware, several months ago, we embarked on replacing all the city water meters in the FlexNet program to give us the ability to read these meters remotely. Since that time, we've experienced a handful of instances where the new meters, there's actually two devices that get put in the meter box. One is an MXU or a smart point that's affixed to the underside of the meter lid, and the other one is a new meter in the ground. The old meters were brass meters predominantly, cost $60, very difficult to damage. The new device affixed to the underside of the meter lid is a plastic computerized device that lets us read those remotely. And the new meter is a hard plastic digital meter. The MXU device costs about $150, and the meter costs about $130. And we've had, like I said, a handful of instances where these items have been damaged. We've had instances where contractors will drive over the meter box we had it happen last week with a big sheetrock truck and damage the meter box and everything inside the box. We've had a handful of customers actually open the meter lid and cut the wire between the MXU device and the meter. We've had a couple of them. I've got one in my office now where someone opened the meter lid and took a hammer to the MXU device so the meter could not be read. So this ordinance would give us a mechanism to provide a little bit of a deterrent to people doing that, and what we're just asking council, that damage occurs to those devices in the box, that we just add the cost of those devices to the customer's water bill.
Very well. Discussion.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Willis.
question, two things. Number one, I think it would be a challenge to prove who went in the box, no matter where it is on private property or adjacent to private property. But my question to try to solve that, is there any opportunity to put a lock on those boxes that's key to lock? So if we're having problems in certain areas, the steel box is locked and they can't actually enter it unless they cut the lock off.
Mr. Yocum, to Councilman Wilson's question, they are locked, are they not?
Some of them are, some of them are not.
I see. And they are predominantly now plastic boxes rather than the steel
Correct.
boxes that we were accustomed to.
That is correct.
Are all of them capable of being locked?
I can find that out from staff.
Okay, likely the new ones are capable of being locked. All right, but that's a good point, Councilman Willis, and we'll ask Mr. Yocum and staff to address that. Of course, the problem becomes when you had steel boxes and you had brass meters that cost $60, they were very, very difficult to damage. They were very sturdy, and they weren't that expensive if they weren't damaged. Now we have these sophisticated devices that allow us a lot better information, that they are much more expensive and much more easily damaged, and they're in a plastic box because they have to be, because the metal interferes with the broadcast of the signal, and so now we're subject to a much higher expense.
I have one
Mayor,
question, Mr.
Let's let Councilman Willis finish, and then I'll turn to Councilwoman Moore. Councilman Willis?
Is there an opportunity that we go to metal boxes, or is that prohibitive? And number two, can riding lawnmowers ride over the tops of these boxes? Because a great deal of people now have riding lawnmowers.
Councilman, I think the answer that rather than turn to staff and have them have to talk with the Zumex, I think I know the answer is the boxes for the new ones have to be plastic because the metal interferes with the signal that is broadcast, and as a result, we have to have plastic boxes, which is something that I can remember from talking to Drew Griffin and Michael Hemingway that they regretted, because we always were willing to pay for the metal boxes because they were more durable and desirable, and they protected the signal better. But unfortunately, because of the broadcast requirement that we depend upon, you have to have plastic because the metal interferes with it. With regard to the riding lawnmowers, I'm looking at Mr. Hemingway, but I think I know the answer is riding lawnmowers can pass over a lot of these boxes in the way they're placed without any difficulty. Usually they are either level with or actually just below the ground level, and so you don't have a problem. And I suspect what we've seen, at least anecdotally, is we're not having problems with somebody hitting these things with a lawnmower or with normal activity. The problem we have is somebody takes a hammer to one, or somebody takes a pair of pliers to one and tries to cut the wires. Those are pretty obvious to us. Nor do I think, and I may be speaking out of school, Mr. Yoakum, you may correct me, but nor do I think it's necessarily the city's desire to try to recoup cost for kind of the normal wear and tear of a box.
That's correct.
What we're concerned about is obviously malicious activity that costs us significant amounts of dollars. I'm correct about that, Mr. Yoakum, Mr. Oster?
Yes, sir.
Other discussion or questions from members?
Yes,
I'm sorry, you're quite right. Councilwoman Moore.
yes, I agree with Councilman Willis that how will you prove that it was malicious activity, and how will you prove who did it? It could not have been the resident that lives in that dwelling. It could have been someone just trying to cause trouble for that resident. And would it not create a hardship to our lower income neighborhoods if they had to pay an additional $150 for that box if it's damaged? A lot of people are having a hard time as it is trying to pay their water bill, water and sewage. And now we'll be asking them to pay an additional money. And that's not going to set right or work right for a lot of people.
Right, and I think, and I'm speaking out of school here again for the staff, but I think I know the answers haven't been a part of these discussions, is you're quite right, Councilman. We're not interested in assessing an additional fee to recoup cost from a ratepayer just because of ordinary wear and tear of a piece of equipment. And if it's questionable as to whether the damage that was done to the piece of equipment was a product of malice and intent, then it's not staff's intent or the city's intent to try to recoup that. What we're talking about is these obvious situations where, as Mr. Yoakum pointed to, we've got this thing that was attacked with a hammer or wire cutters, and it's pretty obvious that you had some intentional conduct going on. And allow us to recoup in those situations, or in a situation where you've got a contractor who obviously has backed over the homeowner's tap, and you want to be able to recoup that from the contractor for the damage they have done. This is not a ordinance that is targeting recoupment of costs for wear and tear from your ordinary user in the ordinary circumstance. But right now, even though we've got a tap that we know was tampered with very obviously, we don't have any way to address that. That's not been so troublesome in the past when the tap is relatively inexpensive and very durable. It is troublesome to the taxpayer when these things cost a couple $300 a pop. Again, Mr. Osterman and Yoakum, have I misstated the design or intent of this ordinance?
You are totally correct.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman.
Yes, question is for Mr. Yoakum and others. How big of a problem is this? How frequently is this happening? You know, coming up with a solution is to a problem is fine, but how big of a problem is it?
Councilman, we've installed about 5,000 of these out of the 33,000 meters citywide, and we've had maybe 1 or 2 dozen of these instances in those 5,000. So it's not a rampant issue, but we could see, like the mayor has stated, with the cost of replacing these devices, the cost could escalate rather quickly without any way for the city currently to recoup the cost.
Is this something that we can just defer right now and kind of spend a little bit more time seeing how things go before we jump in? There seems to be a number of different issues that are of concern, not the least of which is trying to determine who's doing what. And, you know, our law enforcement or those who are responsible for monitoring this would have to take their time from doing something else. I just am concerned that it doesn't sound like it's a very big problem at this point.
Well, Councilman, you can certainly make a motion to defer. For my part, it seems pretty self-evident to me that if an individual willfully damages their meter, that's a very expensive device for the taxpayer, they should be made to pay for that. But if that's a matter of controversy, you can make a motion to defer and.
Mayor,
I have a question here before we proceed. I understand what the issue is, but I do want to ask this question. When you have the box, which are not very durable, my concern is that when you have, especially in the community areas, where people have to park on the side of the road in front of their homes. I'll give my own home, for example. My water meter is literally outside of my gate, but if anyone pulls in front of my home, they're going to drive over that. So are they durable enough just for the normal weight of a car to be able to pass over? Or are they just that fragile?
That may be a question for staff. I don't know that we would call them fragile. Mr. Yoakum?
No.
They are built to be durable.
Mm-hmm.
What they don't sustain is, they don't sustain the blows of a hammer, for sure.
But they can withstand the weight of a car driving over them. That's my main question. Can a car drive over that without causing damage? Because if it can, that's gonna be a lot of them, I especially know over in District 1 when people have to pull in front of their homes. Can it withstand the weight of a normal passenger car or SUV driving over them? Can it withstand that weight? I just want to know that information. I don't have a problem with when it comes to someone purposefully damaging. But what about this normal wear and tear if a homeowner accidentally drive over them? Can it withstand that weight?
Should.
And what staff is conferring and discussing as you're asking, Councilman, you can't see that on Zoom, but the response that I think I understand is, in the situation that you're describing, the box should sustain that weight.
Yes.
And I suspect that the difference is if you've got a fairly equal distribution of weight on a box that is laid into the ground, is not sustaining these particular and strong blows on a fixed point. That weight is distributed more widely and not likely to rupture the box or damage the interior. We certainly don't want people running over their meters. Don't take me to suggest that. But I think that the impetus of the councilwoman's question is, how durable are these meters to accidental damage? And the answer is fairly durable. I think they would sustain the type of force that you're describing. What they don't sustain is severe and direct blows that are focused. I think that's an answer that staff agrees with.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Willis.
I'm good with willful vandalism. My concern is, in reality, the world we live in, some neighbors don't get along with other neighbors. And how do we, in this ordinance, design this language so it can be applied equitably in only when we actually know and can determine who did the vandalism? Just because a meter's in front of a resident's home, I don't know qualified. If that would qualify that in my comfort level, what concerns me is people can be very vindictive, especially if they don't get along with their neighbors. If they find out they can do these things and it's going to cost their neighbor $150 every time our people come back to fix it, that kind of gets pretty unfair. And that just concerns me.
I think that's right, Councilman, and I think you point to a difficulty that we often have in drafting ordinances because we can't imagine every situation. But luckily, what we have done in the past, and really the way most of our ordinances read, is that we allow the discretion of the manager and the utility director on that case-by-case basis with the guidance from council and the guidance of the ordinance, that the intent of the ordinance is to deal with these intentional or malicious acts rather than accidental injury to the equipment or normal wear and tear of the equipment. You know, as a practical matter, for example, Councilman, people call the utility every day and say, I've had a spike in my water bill because I had a ruptured line in this unusual situation, and I asked the city to give me some consideration of the water bill in those circumstances. And the utility does that on a discretionary basis every day of the week. And sometimes they are confronted with people who are just trying to get around paying a water bill. And sometimes they're confronted with people who have a legitimate and unusual and special circumstance. But happily, we've got very able staff who can exercise the discretion to determine which they're confronted with. And of course, like as with all of our ordinances, they're supplied with the directive of staff, which addresses the concerns that you've heard here today, which is, you're right, as a council and as a city, we don't want to tolerate the intentional acts of individuals who are trying to damage an expensive piece of taxpayer equipment in order to evade the law and their obligations. But at the same time, as Councilman Irvin and Councilman Moore have pointed out, and Councilman Wilson pointed out, we also don't want to put a burden upon taxpayers and ratepayers to pay for a piece of equipment that has just deteriorated by natural wear and tear, or the product of some inadvertent and accidental occurrence that was not their fault or was just pure accident and happenstance. As particularly the example Councilman Irvin gives is a perfect one of that. We can't design an ordinance that addresses every circumstance that's going to be confronted by the utility department. And I think if we did, the ordinance would be so long and impossible to operate that it would be useless. But I think this ordinance and our discussion today gives council the direction that they were already operating under, which is what we're talking about here is recklessness and intentional acts of damage and tampering and so forth. What we're not talking about is the natural wear and tear or innocent accidental occurrence.
Mayor,
Does that answer?
great. Now you.
I have a question.
Councilwoman Williams-Blake.
Mr. Yocum, can you tell me, or tell us if there have been any multiple occurrences of damage to a water meter? So, you know, you mentioned the dozen or so. When you repair them, have you had a situation where it then was damaged again? The same one?
Councilwoman, no, we have not to date. Any instances we've experienced have been single instances. We've repaired them and there has been no repair since that time.
Okay, thank you.
Question.
Councilwoman.
Are there any ordinance on the books right now that could be utilized to cover this because of it being purposefully damaged? Is there something that can be applied? Is it necessary to create a whole new ordinance? Can we cover it on anything else?
I think the answer to that, Councilwoman, is the current ordinance doesn't address it, and the reason it doesn't address this is because it really wasn't an issue. The equipment was relatively inexpensive, and was exceedingly durable. You had these brass meters that were $50, $60 a piece and that were very durable. Mr. Peterson is approaching the podium to correct me if I'm incorrect, but there also is, I mean, it's a criminal act, I'm sure, to tamper with a piece of governmental equipment to try to evade your responsibilities with regard to paying your water bill. Chief Heidler is nodding his head up and down, and we're reminded that it is a criminal act to tamper with your water meter, but that's not particularly reassuring to the taxpayer. What the city really would prefer is not to arrest someone and put them in jail. What we'd really like is to have the water meter fixed. Mr. Peterson, can you speak to that?
You just hit exactly upon what I was going to point out. Our present ordinance, the only protection that we have is when there's an intentional act. There is a provision within our ordinance in the current section 12.130 that makes it a criminal act, and they can be charged and brought in by summons into the municipal court. What it doesn't allow there, it allows them to be fined or potentially imprisoned for it. It doesn't create any mechanism where they have to pay back for the damage that they caused.
So this ordinance would give us the ability to create a lesser penalty than the present ordinance.
That's correct.
And so the purpose of this is to pretty well decriminalize the criminal part, so we won't prosecute them, but they would really just be fined so they can cover the damage so the property can be replaced.
What this would allow is simply that they would be charged on their water bill for the cost that we incurred in replacing the item damaged.
Okay, so it create compensation for the damage incurred without a criminal penalty to it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman,
And again, my question is, how can you prove that it was the person that lives in that household that did it? Councilman Willis said it could have been a disgruntled neighbor. It could be a disgruntled spouse, former spouse, or partner. It could be children playing. It doesn't have to be intentional by the person that lives in that household.
Right, and Councilwoman, I think what we would say to that is, I take your current situation, right? Say Mr. Yoakum has a $300 worth of city equipment that has very obviously to him and the rest of the staff been intentionally tampered with and damaged. Right now, his only avenue to deal with that is to either one, do nothing, replace it and just pretend it didn't happen and take the $300 loss to the taxpayer, or two, refer it to Chief Heidler, who then brings criminal charges, prosecutes the case in a criminal courtroom where the defendant can then raise all the defenses you've just pointed to. This wasn't an intentional act, this was children playing, or this was whatever. Whereupon the jury will determine the individual's guilt or lack of guilt, and that resolves the matter. That's not the best course, though, as Councilwoman Irvin points out. The city doesn't want to, it's not very efficient or effective for the city of Florence to have this damaged piece of equipment then referred to the criminal venue. Chief Heidler's got better things to do than prosecute water tampering, and it doesn't effectively make the city whole, and it gives somebody a criminal record that you really don't have any interest in giving a criminal record to. What this does is gives us an alternative means of recouping the taxpayers' dollars in situations where the intent was very obvious, while not having to pursue criminal prosecution and while not losing the taxpayers' money. In situations where it's not obvious, then staff is going to err on the side of saying, well, we won't pursue it. I mean, that's...
So would the resident have to pay all of this in one lump sum, or could it be done in increments? Because if someone's on a fixed income or doesn't have much income, that's going to be troublesome to them, and they're going to have a hard time paying this in addition to their regular water bill.
And Councilman, I think the answer to that is, and this is me speaking for staff, but Mr. Yoakum is nodding to me, as we do with all other like situations in the utility, payment plans over time are very common and would be utilized here. But I would remind the councilwoman that if we arrive at that situation, it is because the staff believes beyond any, with clear and convincing evidence, that this was an intentional act by a ratepayer. And so, you know, while we would be willing to give them the accommodation of allowing them to pay that over time, it should be recognized that this is in the context of a loss to them that was self-inflicted.
Yeah, but we keep saying self-inflicted, but we could never prove who inflicted it. It may not be the person that actually lives in the household. So there needs to be something in this ordinance that specifies that they also can pay it over a period of time in incremental payments, because we can't prove who did it. There's no way we'll be able to prove who actually did it.
Yeah, Councilwoman, we can certainly do that. That is already memorialized by city policy. With regard to all other types of payments, but we can certainly, you know, amend the ordinance between first and second reading to recognize that we would follow the existing city policy on that ground.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman.
Yes, I'd move to defer this matter so that the concerns raised by council could be addressed by staff. I think there's some very good points have been raised, particularly how do you identify who is the perpetrator, so that you're not assuming that the homeowner is the one who did it. Even there may be a suspicion, there may be an inclination to believe that, but proof of that is a different issue. And so I would move at this point that we defer the matter to send it back to our staff for further evaluation.
There's been a motion to defer. Is there a second?
Second.
It's a second by Councilman Willis. Any further discussion on the motion to defer? I would say only, folks, that you know these are matters that otherwise would be referred to criminal prosecution. If we've got sufficient evidence to refer them to Chief Heiler for criminal prosecution, I think the staff has the sufficient evidence to recoup the taxpayer's dollar without criminal prosecution. I don't know that a deferral of this issue is necessary. But there's been a motion and a second. Any discussion, further discussion of the motion to defer? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion to defer, please indicate by raising your hand so that I can count. Councilman Willis, Councilman Jabali, Councilwoman Irvin, and Councilwoman Moore. Am I correct about that? Very well. Then the motion to defer passes by a vote of 4-3. And the matter will be deferred until the next council meeting.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman.
I would just ask, and my intention is not to derail this. My intention is to ask our able staff to look at the fairness of how this ordinance can maybe be amended so that a homeowner is not taken advantage of due to activities beyond their control. And if there's some mitigation that can be done to help that kind of situation, I'm totally on the situation where a truck drives over it, or we know there's evidence of who did this. But my major concern is that's a lot of money to a lot of people, and especially in our era that we're living in now. And I just want to get this right. I'm certainly not trying to derail this, and I want staff to know that. And I understand the need for this, but I count on them to bring us something when we bring to the table some concerns, some ways maybe to mitigate those concerns. That's just where I stand.
Thank you, Councilman.
And Mayor, I would like to second what Councilman Willis just stated. I like the fact that it will take the penalty and take it out of the criminal court. And I want to respect the fact that, as with what Councilwoman Moore said, this being sure that we are able to not punish an innocent person. But I also heard for a fact that when these things are done, there's sufficient evidence to take it to court. So I would just say that if we could review it so the rest of the council could feel comfortable with the final, decision or ordinance. It's my desire.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Next matter for our consideration is Bill number 2020-19 for a first reading, an ordinance to rezone from RS to RG3, a parcel located on Sam Harrell Road, tax map 00175-01-224. Is there a
So
motion?
moved.
Here from Mr. Dudley. Well, I've lost everyone on my screen.
I still see you.
All right.
I can't see him. I see well, I do see you.
All right, now you've returned to the screen. So is there a motion on this rezoning request?
So moved.
Second.
The motion by Councilman Bailey, second by Councilman Moore. Mr. Dudley.
Thank you. This is a request to rezone from RS to RG3. It's approximately 44 acres located along Sam Harrell Road. And this property was originally annexed into the city in 2008 under the zoning designation of R3. And what happened was, during our translation of zoning districts over to the Unified Development Code, it was applied the residential suburban zoning district. And in doing so, drastically changed what could and couldn't be developed there. Under the old zoning designation of R3, and there was some frontage zoned R2 at the time too, but it was allowed on the R3 zoning 6,000 square foot lots, and on the R2 10,000 square foot lots. And the new zoning under the Unified Development Code that was applied allowed 2-acre lots. So you can see the drastic change there. And this was unintentional by staff during the translation of the zoning ordinance. So the applicant is requesting the zoning of RG3, which is more in line with the old zoning designation. And Planning Commission did vote unanimously 8-0 to recommend this rezoning request. And I do have a few pictures of the property here. It is currently vacant road frontage here along Sam Harrell Road, and it is adjacent to some R3 zoned neighborhoods as well. This concludes staff's report.
Thank you, Mr. Dudley. For those at home and council, obviously, when we adopted the Uniform Development Ordinance and our new zoning classifications, we knew that we'd have to go back, and this was a huge document, and we knew we'd have to correct some errors we made. And this one, you take what had previously been zoned for 6,000 square foot lots, and we unintentionally create a zoning that required 2-acre lots. That wasn't what there was before, and so now we're trying to recalibrate that and put it back to where it was before. There's been a motion and second. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Measure passed unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Dudley. Next for us is Bill number 2020-20 for a first reading, in order to rezone from CG to NC4, 2 parcels located along East Chapel View Drive in Florence County. Tax map parcel 0015201-119 and 015201140. Is there a motion so we may hear from Mr. Dudley?
So moved.
Second.
Willis, second by Councilman Moore. Mr. Dudley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This property is located in South Florence off of South Irby Street, and more specifically also off of Chapel View Drive. It is currently zoned commercial general, so it is our most broad commercial zoning. which is, in my opinion, a little odd for this parcel, but it was zoned this, I believe, back in the early 2000s. And the applicant is requesting to zone these two parcels Neighborhood Conservation 4, which permits small lot development. The proposed plan here and the plan that was approved contingent upon this rezoning is a single-family detached neighborhood consisting of small lots with a small cul-de-sac coming off of East Chapel View Drive. And Planning Commission did vote unanimously 8-0 to recommend this rezoning.
Thank you. And for those at home, this is a request for rezoning from commercial general, which is a not particularly restrictive type of zoning, to a more restrictive type of zoning that would allow single-family detached homes as opposed to townhouses and other sorts of commercial general, which is what the applicant anticipates doing, as I understand the stuff.
That's correct.
Very well. There's been a motion to second discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Measure passes unanimously. Next matter for our consideration is introduction of resolutions. First being Resolution 2020-13 to appoint Randall Osterman as Director of the Public Facilities Corporation. You all recall that in our previous borrowing, we created the Public Facilities Corporation to receive the funds of the borrowing. That required that we have individuals identified for that corporation, and a gentleman that some of you may know by the name of Drew Griffin sat on that corporation as director. Mr. Griffin has now gone on to enjoy his days by the lake, and so we have to replace him, and there's Mr. Osterman, who of course is in the same position, city manager, that Mr. Griffin was, is a natural substitute. Is there a motion and second so we can hear any further information from staff on that?
So move.
Second.
I think it's a motion by Councilwoman Irvin, second by Councilwoman Moore. Further information from staff that we need? Or have I?
No, sir, you've handled it quite well.
Very well. So, well, I don't know about how well I handled it, but at least I conveyed the information. And all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Measure passes unanimously. Mr. Ostman, we have now just added to your duties, so that's always a pleasure for you, I know. Next matter for our consideration, reports to council. The issue of when and how recreational programs will come back into activity has been one that everyone in the community is really interested in. Of course, we passed an ordinance some months ago to ask staff to make those decisions with regard to youth activities and recreational activities using the same kind of parameters that we talked about earlier today. And they have certainly done so, and so Mr. Pope is here to update us a little bit on where they are and where they plan to go. Mr. Pope.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Let me open up this document for you. It is in your packet. As we have done for the last several months, the city has monitored and kept abreast of changes with the COVID developments within our nation, within our state, but particular to our PD region and our county. And following the guidelines set aside by the CDC as well as the governor's office, you know, there has been some relaxing of those guidelines within the last several months, a couple of weeks too. So we have provided you a current schedule of our park and recreation athletic activities. As you note in the packet and in the information before you, our parks are open. They're open for people to enjoy the nature, the beauty, and to mingle in small groups within those facilities. Our parks are not open for reservations of picnic areas or building facilities for birthday parties and reunions and those types of activities where large gatherings take place. Two things that we are allowing in the athletic arena during the current period is the tennis center is open, as well as the pickleball courts at Timrod Park. And these are for singles or doubles play and some private lessons only, so that we are maintaining those social distancing guidelines, as well as keeping the participants to a minimum. You can only play on one court of the two pod courts at the tennis center. And so those give us the separation we feel comfortable with and is recommended by the CDC. As you look toward July, we have several tournaments that are scheduled. One at the Florence Tennis Center, a youth state tournament by about 128 kids. And then at Freedom Florence Recreation Complex, we have 3 tournaments scheduled starting July 10th at that facility. As we already know around the state, other areas are beginning to open up these types of sports tourism facilities, and we're taking the opportunity to plan and move toward a July 1 date in that regard. At the same time, we will continue to monitor the cases of development within our community, and as necessary, make any adjustments to those tournament guidelines and the tournament schedules that we are providing. And then looking ahead to the month of August, certainly we have a number of our coaches and parents within the Florence community who are interested to know when our youth leagues are going to crank back up. And those we are looking to mid to late August. They will involve fall baseball, fall softball, the possibility of the junior football league and cheerleading, gymnastics, recreational classes, volleyball, and then open our playgrounds sometime around August the 1st. So with that, we feel comfortable taking into consideration that all things stay the same and our cases continue to fall to lower numbers over the next month. But we wanted to make you aware of those and asked if you may have comments regarding that schedule.
Questions or comments from members of council?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman.
I had a visit with the president of the soccer league here in Florence this morning. I don't want to tie council up, but there's some concerns from the soccer league if this mediation can be done to allow testing of the soccer players individually be allowed. And I won't take this time to go into that, but I'd like to have a sit down with you sometime shortly to let's look at those issues and see if there's anything we can do to mediate so they can begin testing those players. So if I could just check with you and get a time that you're available, maybe ask the president of the soccer league to meet with us, see if we can look at some other alternatives to help them. So when it is open, they're ready to play. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilman. We can certainly do that. Both MUSC and McLeod, of course, are engaged in significant testing. And so I'm sure that we can coordinate with those organizations and help the Soccer Association reach a higher level of comfort. I think that's
Mayor,
Councilwoman.
I do want to state that we to be mindful that we hear the word testing and then there's screening. When you're screening people, you're checking for signs and symptoms and a fever. The testing is the process when they're actually going and do the swabs and have the swabs sent off. So when you're discussing that and what the soccer league may be looking at, and I'm sure if you meet with some of the healthcare professionals, they will let you know there's going to be a difference between screenings and actual testings.
Right.
Mr.
Mayor?
I think, did I hear Mayor Pro Tem Buddy?
Yes, you did. I have a question, please, for Chuck Pope. I just want to make sure I heard him correct that the tennis facility in July, we are looking to have those tournaments ongoing. Is that my understanding?
That is correct. And the first one we have scheduled is July 10th through the 13th, which is the Palmetto State Championship for the youth age group.
Absolutely. Great. I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. Thank you.
Gentlemen,
Councilwoman.
I noticed through everything, basketball was never mentioned. And a lot of our young men, young boys want to know when can they play basketball. And there are many summer traveling youth teams, including my own. And right now, of course, I've canceled that for this summer because of COVID-19. But I've been asked consistently, when will basketball be allowed again?
Councilwoman, if you notice in July, down toward the bottom of that section, it has the Pearlmore Basketball Center, and we are talking about limiting some free play within that facility. One of the things we're concerned about with basketball is the close contact involved with the basketball, particularly to tournaments and 5-on-5 type play. We are continuing to monitor this idea, and we will be watching other facilities over the course of the next several weeks to see how they pan out, because there are some tournaments that are beginning to be offered at various sports venues. We want to be as cautious as possible, but also open up some of our facilities to those areas that can provide and maintain that social distancing aspect.
Thank you, Mr. Pope. And let me add to members and to the community, this is no easy task. Obviously, the different sports that the city hosts and organizes have a variety of challenges with regard to maintaining social distancing. Basketball is quite different than soccer or baseball. Gymnastics has a different level of interaction than tennis does. And so there is some discretion that staff has to exercise with regard to the close proximity of the participants, as well as the proximities of spectators. Of course, basketball occurs in an enclosed facility where, like gymnastics occurs in an enclosed facility, whereas soccer and baseball are different, or tennis is quite different as well. That being said, it is the city's strong desire and my strong desire that we treat all these recreational activities similarly, and that we not unfairly favor one group or another. We are all, as elected officials, cognizant of different constituencies that are all very interested in getting back to normal life, and are all very interested in their children being able to, particularly during these summer months, get the heck out of the house. But we all need to be conscious of the difficult tasks staff has, and support them, and support them in the community, and the decisions of administration with regard to what can open safely, when, and how.
Mayor,
Councilwoman.
personally, this is just me personally, I'm a little skeptical about any of them opening up right now.
Yeah.
Because Florence is not taking COVID-19 as seriously as we should be. But I mean,
Right.
it is what it is. That's just a personal opinion.
And Councilwoman, I think, you know, we quite appropriately, I think we're closing the meeting today the way we opened it, which is talking about the difficult struggle of figuring out how do we balance the need for health and safety with the need for interaction, whether that be a public meeting, the interaction between members of council here at that meeting, or whether that be a tennis facility that wants to have a tournament, or a basketball facility that's desperate to get back to play. And those are discretionary judgments that just will have to come up on a case-by-case basis, and unfortunately, we'll feel our way through this process all the time, being cognizant of the changes in the environment. Listen, if rates of infection increase dramatically or continue to increase in the coming weeks and months, that's going to affect staff's determinations with regard to whether a facility can open. Whereas on the other hand, as Councilwoman pointed out earlier, if those levels flatline or decrease, that creates a different situation. And unfortunately for all of us, that changes on a day-by-day basis. But we'll do our best and march forward. Other questions of staff or comments? Very well. Thank you, Mr. Pope, and good luck. The next matter then on our agenda was an executive session. However, we are not quite ready to talk about those matters that are called for in that executive session, so we'll just defer that to the next meeting. Unless there is other business for this council, we entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Without objection, we stand adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.